Hello and welcome to Nana's Crafty Home. My name is Tanya. Today I am going to be doing a basic how to change colors in corner to corner crochet so that you're able to work color graphs with the corner to corner technique like a pro. I am including this graph. We're going to be working this as a crochet dishcloth, and this will give you a really good idea on how to take this technique into other graphs so that you can work this with any graph that you choose. If you haven't yet watched the video on my basic corner to corner stitch tutorial and you've never worked this technique before, I do encourage you to stop this video, go watch that, and then come back to this one. If you are here to learn how to change colors in corner to corner crochet and you want to follow along with me with this graph, head on over to the website via the link that I provide below, and there is a printable graph for you that you can print off and follow along with me as well today. So one of the big things that we're going to talk about is how to carry your yarn on your project. Not throughout your project, but how do you manage those color changes? And there are several ways, whatever you feel comfortable with, to do that. Several tools that you can use, and I'm going to show you a few of them here today. So this is these are yarn bobbins, and basically you wrap your yarn around this bobbin. It's plastic. You can find these at craft stores. I'll have a link on my blog post so that you can see these in person on the website. These are smaller. They don't hold as much yarn, but these work perfect in my opinion for smaller projects. I generally gravitate more towards smaller graphs, not a lot of big projects. I do have a few on my website though. And with bigger projects, you may want bigger bobbins as these will not hold as much yarn. You can, a lot of people like these clips. This is just a potato chip clip, a snack chip holder, and you can wrap yarn around this as well. And then the nice thing about these clips is then you can clip it to your work and it will be out of your way. This is a homemade one that I just whipped up this morning out of some cardboard. If you're going to make your own bobbins, I do recommend that you use cardboard or another stiff material so that it's not really flimsy when you put the yarn on there, and it won't fold and that type of thing. This is pretty sturdy and it's going to hold it nicely. This is pretty large. This holds a lot of yarn. You may not want something this big for a smaller project like what we're going to work today. So you could certainly customize this to any size. You could even match it up and get close to this size of yarn bobbin, maybe make it a little bit bigger. If you're making your own, the other thing I'm going to mention is that you're going to want to include a little notch in it. And that little notch is going to help hold your yarn in place that's hanging off of your work. And so when you wrap it, and then you're done wrapping, and when you're done using it and you're dropping it, you can stick that yarn in the notch and it holds it in place so it doesn't unravel while you're working with other colors. And I'll show you how all of this works as we go through this project, but I wanted to show you some of the common tools that people use for color graphkins in corner to corner crochet. So as I mentioned, we're going to be working that heart, and I'm going to be using white, red, or pink, and gray to match with the graph. And I'm going to be using cotton so that I can make a dishcloth with this. But you can use any kind of yarn that you would like, but if you are going to make it a dishcloth, then I do recommend cotton for the yarn that you're going to be using. So the other thing I'm going to mention, if you are loading up one of your bobbins and you know that you're only going to be crocheting 3 blocks. So each of these blocks on this graph represent 1 block of corner to corner. And if you've watched my tutorial or you've worked with corner to corner before, you know 1 block represents 3 double crochets plus a chain 3. So with this yarn and this hook, 1 of these blocks, I need 26 inches of yarn to complete 1 block. So I've measured, and for 26 inches of yarn, that corresponds to 10 wraps on my bobbin. So I know to do 1 block, I need to wrap the yarn around here 10 times. If I'm doing 3 blocks, I need to wrap 30 times around here. Then I don't have a lot left over. I don't have a lot of waste on my yarn. If you're doing a bigger project, you're really just going to want to load up your bobbins and get as much yarn on there as you can so that you're not having as many ends to weave in. So just a note, and you can certainly do that same math for yourself for any project that you're working. So I would recommend that if you are starting a new project and you are doing a new yarn weight and a new hook size, and you want to know how many wraps on whatever bobbin you're going to be using, go ahead and measure. So do 1 block and then measure how much yarn that used, and then wrap that amount around your bobbin, and it will tell you how many times you need to wrap around the bobbin to get 1 block worth of work. I hope that makes sense for you. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started on this graph and making our square dishcloth. In order to do that, I'm going to be starting with the gray, and you can see here that the gray is a large portion of the beginning part of this graph. So I am not going to be adding the gray on the bobbin. I'm going to be working directly from the skein, and you can choose to do that as well if you have a large swath of your project that is going to be one color and you're not switching back and forth. You don't need to put everything on a bobbin. So I'm going to just be working on gray off the skein, and then as I get up to the white, I'll add these colors in on bobbins. Since I've already shown you in a previous video how to work the general corner to corner technique, I'm going to go ahead and get started on the gray, and when I come back, I'm going to show you how to add in your next color and how to put that on your bobbin and have it hang off your work. All right, so I have worked 7 rows of gray. That is my last row of nothing but gray, as you can see by the corresponding graph here. So I like to tell people too, you can pay attention to where you're at on your graph, where you're at here with your work, by counting how many blocks. So when I count these blocks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in both directions, I've completed my 7th row. And on my graph here, you can see this is row 7, working diagonally. There's all of those grays that I just worked. Now you may ask yourself the question, okay, so we're on row 8 now, and if we're starting from here, we would have 1 block of gray, and then we would have all of these whites before we get to this last gray here. So how do you know which direction that you're working? So when you're looking at your work, this is my first block that I worked. You can see my tail that I left here. The first block is the wrong side of the work. So you can see this is the back side of those double crochets from that first block. This is the right side. So even though you may have your tail down here, if you have your work turned to this side, to the side with the first block having the front side of your double crochet showing, you may think that you're working your graph for row 8 from this direction. But really, we want to pay attention. This is the side, this is our right side of our work. And so really row 8 starts up here. And that matters, of course, because if the colors were different, and they certainly could be, we could be working our graph incorrectly from where we are. So just pay attention to where you are in your work and where you're at in the graph, and you won't have any issues. So for row 8, to start, we have 1 block of gray. So I'm going to go ahead and do that 1 block. And then I'm going to bring in my white. And I'm going to show you 2 different ways to change colors. So I'm going to set that aside for right now. I'm going to get white loaded up on my bobbin. And I'm just going to load this up here. Just wrap it. And again, you can use any bobbin that you would like. And these little bobbins, they can hold quite a bit of yarn. They're small, but they're mighty. I'm getting quite a bit of yarn on here. All right, so when you get to a place where you have enough on your bobbin, you're going to cut that. And I'm just going to put that to the side. I'm going to bring this down so you can get a good look at what I'm doing in order to change colors. And like I just said, there are 2 ways to change colors that I've seen. I use both ways, just not all the time. I'll show you what happens with both routes. Then you can make the choice as to which direction you would like to go. So the first way is to do your block, and when you're getting ready to change a color, don't finish your last double crochet. Don't do your final yarn over to pull through the last 2 loops. Leave those 2 loops on your hook. And then when you go to change your color, bring in your new color and you finish that double crochet with the new color. Then you go ahead and do your slip stitch with the new color, chain 3 as you normally would, and do your 3 double crochets in that chain 3 space. So as you can see, what happened here by finishing out the double crochet with the new color, the slip stitch is now visible here with the white. You can pull that pretty tightly when you go to weave in that end. You could also go ahead and pull it tightly and work over that tail with that block of double crochet. But when you do that, you are seeing that pull here in the back. So I generally, if I'm working that technique, I generally don't work over the tail because I don't like that. I like to hide it a little bit better than that. So the other thing is when you drop your other color, before finishing the double crochet, your tail from that color is way down here. And I don't always like that because when I pull that color back into my work, you can see on the back of your work that bit of tail, depending on where you're pulling it into. So that's the first way that you can change, and that is way a lot of people change colors in corner to corner. And I do that periodically myself. I can do both techniques in the same work. Just depends on how it looks to me at the time that I'm doing it. The second way to change colors is to finish your last double crochet with the same color as what you were working for that block. And then when you go to do the next block in the next color, drop your color that you're working and then pull in your new color with the slip stitch. And now those two loops you see here are the gray. To me, they're a little less visible, that color change. Then do your chain 3 and work your 3 double crochets. Now when I do my color change this way, I do go ahead and work my 3 double crochets over that tail of the white. So working those 3 double crochets over that chain 3 space, I've also worked it over that tail. Once I've worked those 3 double crochets, I leave that tail hang. I don't work over it anymore to weave in that end. I go in and manually weave that end in once I'm done with my project. And then I go on. Now some would say, why aren't you carrying your gray? Because if you look at your graph, I'm up here on row 8, we worked the 1. Now I'm gonna have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 blocks of white and then a gray here at the bottom. I am not going to carry my gray through all 6 of those blocks because your work is going to have a tendency to pucker. If you were carrying your gray, you would have to carry that gray. I'm going to give you a visual here. You would have to carry that gray through all of these blocks. So here's your first block. There would be 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. This would be your last block of white. So I would have to carry that gray up, working around it here, and then up here, and then pulling it up here. And it's really hard to judge how much length to give that to work over. It just has a tendency of pulling and puckering your work that is just not attractive, does not look professional. I don't carry my yarn very often, and when I do carry my yarn, it is over short distances, usually no more than 2 to 3 blocks. I would rather tuck in my ends later, weave it, have a few more ends to weave in, then have my work look unprofessional by puckering and making those blocks look tight together. So I am not going to work over that gray. I'm going to drop that white tail that I worked over, and I'm going to finish the rest of my white blocks by just continuing on with the corner to corner technique. And again, I'm working off of this bobbin here. So let's pull up a little bit so you can see I'm working off of this bobbin. My gray yarn is off to the side that I dropped, and I'm just going to work all of these white blocks. And it's going to be a total of 6 white blocks. Okay, so I have finished my 6th white block, And according to my graph, after that white block, my last one for row 8 is a gray. So I want to change back to gray. So I'm going to drop my white, and before I drop my white, I'm just going to bring the yarn up close to my work and then put this in the notch so that when it hangs off of my work, it doesn't unravel. You can see here it's just going to hang off there. Some people, like I said, like those clips that they can wrap yarn around, and then that clip would just attach to your work, and then you would just pick it back up when you wanted to use it. Particularly for big blankets that you're working on, this option is the way to go. I find it a little bit awkward on smaller projects to have 3 or 4 of these big heavy clips attached to my work, but again, that's personal preference. So I've loaded up another bobbin with gray because now you can see, according to my graph, I'm moving on to row 9, and I'm going to be working 2 blocks here of gray, but you can see here I've got a lot of gray that I'll be able to use that bobbin for. So I've loaded this up with gray, and I'm going to pull it into my work. And I'm going to use the second technique that I showed you by finishing that last double crochet with the white, and then with the slip stitch, I'm going to be pulling in the gray all the way through. And then I'm going to work that block just as I normally would with my chain 3 and 3 double crochets. And then I'm going to move on to row 9. And you can see here again, I have 2 blocks of gray that I'm going to be working at the beginning of this row. So do my increase. And now for row 9, here comes my pink. So I'm not going to be picking up the white. I'm going to be working with pink. So I want to bring in a bobbin loaded with pink. So I've loaded up a bobbin with my pink. I'm ready to go ahead and bring in my pink color. And again, I've finished the last double crochet, and I'm going to be changing over to my pink. Now I'm going to make a note here because I'm following this graph, and I can see row 10 is going to use white again. If I leave my white hang off here, I'm not going to be able to pull this easily back up into my work for row 10. I would probably need to go ahead, cut this, and then bring it in again, which would give me 2 more ends to weave in. Because I'm looking ahead in my pattern and I can see where I'm going to be using certain colors, I can do some neat little tricks to help me not have as many ends to weave in. So when I bring in this pink with this slip stitch, I'm going to pick up this white and I'm going to carry it up put it over my hook. And the other thing I'm going to want to make sure that I do when I do that is make sure that this has been pulled tightly down here, so that way it's not loose when I go to tuck in that end. And if I were to let this stay loose down here when I pull this back up, there's no easy way to pull this nice and snug. So I'm going to snug this up, insert my hook into that chain 3 where I'm going to do that slip stitch, bring that white yarn up and around my hook. Then I'm going to bring in my pink, and complete my slip stitch. And this may feel awkward at first when you're doing this because you're working over so many strands of yarn, but with experience, this will get easier. Then I'm going to do my chain 3, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to want to go ahead and not work over that white. I'm going to want to drop that white and pick it up on my next row. And I'm going to go ahead and work over that tail of the pink when I'm working these 3 double crochets. Drop the tail to weave in later. Okay, so now that I've worked that 1 block of pink, you can see here on the back, I've pulled that white up to where it'll make it easy for me to use that for row 10. I've worked over that bit of tail, which helps weave in that end. I'm going to now drop it and weave the rest of it in later. And then I'm going to complete the rest of the pinks. So I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pinks before I have another block of white here. So go ahead and complete those blocks of pink. So I've completed those 5 blocks of pink. It's now time to bring in my 1 block of white. So I am going to drop my pink, and again, I want to make sure that I bring that bobbin up to my work, notch it so that it hangs off and doesn't unravel and get tangled up with any of the other bobbins. Go ahead and do my slip stitch and bring in my white with my new bobbin. Then work my 3 double crochets over that tail of the white. My next block is a gray, so I'm going to drop my white, and again, taking this little extra time at the color changes is going to make a world of difference in the headache that your project may become if you have a lot of bobbins hanging off the back. If you just let these hang off and you don't cinch them up, they're going to get tangled up. You're going to have the same problem you would have if you would have just used skeins of yarn. So take that extra minute, the few seconds that it takes to just cinch your bobbins up so they don't become unraveled, they don't tangle with each other, and it will be very helpful. So now I'm going to bring in, so this is the gray that I dropped when I started my first white. And so when you're bringing and pulling in a color back into your work that's already in your work, make sure that you snug it up. So that way you don't have any gaps in your work. So just make sure that's nice and tight without puckering your work. And then just slip stitch and pull it in. You only really want to do that too is if you are pulling it up against a block of the same color. So if this had been dropped down here, and I had a white block here, so there were 2 white blocks together, and I had dropped my gray down here, and I wanted that gray for this next block that I was working, I would not want to pull that up into our work because it would be too visible. You would see this gray yarn line in between 2 blocks of white. So only pull up yarn if it's going to match one of the blocks on either side of it. And that's it's a good trick for you. Good tip. So I'm going to work this next block of gray. And that completes row 9. So let's take a look at that. So by completing row 9, and we are here on our graph, you can see my bobbins. And see, look, I neglected to follow my own advice and cinch up my gray here. So I have 4 bobbins going right now. None of them are tangled up with each other. They're hanging off of my work. They're ready for me to pick up when I need for the next row. I'm going to move on to row 10. The first one is a gray block for row 10. So I'm just going to go ahead and do my increase. I'm already using gray. So for row 10, it's 1 block of gray, so go ahead and do your increase. Then my next block is white. So I'm going to drop my gray. You can see here my white is ready for me in the right spot. So I'm going to pull that in. And when I pull that in, you can see it is here. This is the block that I'm working here, and this is where I'm slip stitching. So I'm going to pull that yarn through for my slip stitch. When I do that, I want to make sure that I'm pulling it snugly so that it's pulling that work together, but it's not puckering or pulling too tightly. Then I'm going to chain 3. And now I'm going to be working over that yarn that I just pulled over to do the slip stitch. I'm going to be working over that as well as that chain 3. My next block is a pink, so I'm going to drop that white, cinch it up here, drop it off my work, and then pull in my pink. And again, this is 1 block over. You can see I'm going to be doing my slip stitch to the top of that chain 3 here. It was dropped 1 block over, so I'm going to be pulling it in to my work, making sure that this is pulled nice and snug to do that slip stitch through all of that. So then chain 3 and work over both the chain 3 space as well as that pink that we pulled over. And for row 10, I'm going to be working a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pinks again. So continue on working your pink. After my 5th block of pink, it's now time to do 1 white. So I'm going to drop my pink, cinch it up, and pull in my white. And remember, I had pulled that up into my work so it would be ready for row 10. So what I'm going to do here, so I'm going to flip that over to the other side, do my slip stitch, pull in that white, chain 3, and work 3 double crochets over that chain 3 space and the white that I pulled over. I'm going to drop my white, and the last 2 blocks are my gray. So I have my gray here. I'm going to pull it up because it's down below my block. So I'm going to be pulling it up through my slip stitch. So when I do my slip stitch, make sure it's nice and snug and pull through for my slip stitch and chain 3. And then complete the block. And then my last block is gray, so go ahead and complete that. Okay, so that is row 10. And you can see how this is taking shape. I'm able to change colors. I don't have a lot of problems with my yarn getting tangled up with each other. I am making sure that my ends are being tucked in and working over those a little bit through that first block when they're being brought in, and then dropping them to weave in later. And really just making sure that as you're working and pulling in yarn that you're snugging that up nice so that those color changes are as invisible as possible and you don't have a lot of loose loops at your color changes. So that is a basic tutorial for color changes in a corner to corner Grafghan. I'm going to go ahead and complete working on this heart as you see it here, using that same technique throughout that I've shown you. And when I come back, I will show you my completed graph, my completed dishcloth. As you can see here, I finished my graph. I've replicated this paper graph into my heart dishcloth using those changing colors techniques that I showed you earlier. To finish your dishcloth, if you're making this as a dishcloth, I did go ahead and do 1 row edging around the outside of my dishcloth, a simple single crochet with 3 single crochets placed in each corner to help turn those corners. I hope you found this tutorial helpful for you today. If you enjoy my tutorials, please remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Next up in my corner to corner basic series will be how to carry your yarn colors. I hope to see you soon. Please remember to follow me on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and Twitter. And as always, thank you so much for joining me today. See you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.